Doug, and you rode your bicycle, right?
Every day.
I know. I have to admire him. It'll be in the middle of winter. He's riding, and it's wet and rainy, and Doug's out there doing that. He's been to, I think, every meeting we've had. I just can't say enough about him and his responsiveness for emails and stuff. Very knowledgeable, and he'll find the answer and really advocate for making things better around here. So anyway, with that, Doug, why don't you tell us about loss and VMT? Did I get that right?
You got it. They're spelled out later, but these are the abbreviations we use. I will say I did come for the air conditioning, and it's going to get hotter throughout the summer, and I do ride my bike everywhere, so if someone can figure that out, I would appreciate that. I hand out the handouts before the meeting, but if anyone doesn't have any, you can feel free to pass those around. Okay, great. I'm going to keep moving. So LOS and VMT, those are two phrases you probably don't hear VMT that much yet, but you probably hear LOS a lot when we talk about traffic analysis, especially traffic analysis related to new development. In particular, they're the primary, LOS is the current primary CEQA traffic analysis criteria for almost every city in California, and it's shifting to VMT. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. LOS is level of service, VMT is vehicle miles traveled. LOS. So LOS is really, I have another slide about this, but since you're asking. LOS is a measure of traffic flow. From the user's perspective, that's a measure of delay. Like how much delay do I feel when I'm traveling on the roadway? So there's an established calculation method to determine, there's a number of calculation methods for different types of roadway segments and intersections to calculate LOS. They're not that straightforward, so I'm not going to talk about them. But generally they mean this. LOS-A is no congestion. B and C is a little bit of congestion. LOS-D, which is the most important one, is the threshold criteria in the city of San Jose. So I'm going to read it. Significant congestion on some approaches, but intersection is functional. Vehicles required to wait through more than one cycle during short peaks. Okay, and then E is severe congestion. F is total breakdown. Steve.
Can you define functional and short?
I think the second part of the sentence is really where the description is. Vehicles required to wait through more than one cycle during short periods. So during short peaks. So during the peak times, if you're if you're driving down a road, you hit a red light, it turns green, and you can get through it, you're through in one cycle. If every once in a while, you're driving down the road, it turns green, it turns red, it turns green, it turns red, and then you're through the intersection or more of those, then we're in level LOS-D.
So specific to short peaks, is that 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours?
These are, I do have a master's degree in civil engineering where I did these calculations, but that was a long time ago. There's a guy that sits 2 cubes down from me that does them, so I don't have the exact answer to that. Okay. But I do think qualitatively, like, you can get a feel for that, waiting more through more than one cycle.
I understood that, but right, you do the measurement for a specific period of time. Rush hour has changed, or is it the rush hours that are really this kind of
Right, so the CEQA currently, well, every city does CEQA a little bit differently. In the city of San Jose, we have 2 hours where we specify 2 hours in the evening. I think it's an hour in the morning. I also don't look at this stuff all the time. But basically, we have pre-established peak times, right? What you're describing is establishing, is there a peak time outside of those pre-established 2 hours, right? So the way you do that is you collect 24/7 traffic data, preferably over a number of weeks. You know, the more data you have, the better the average. And then you look through that to find out where the real peak time we're looking for is at 15 minutes and an hour. And we're moving in that direction, but we do have established criteria and policy, which is why we have a lot more of what you're talking about.
Is that broken down to I have to wait for 12 other green lights to go before I get mine again? I mean, how far is that broken down?
What?
I go to work at 5 o'clock in the morning. I sit through a cycle of lights when nobody's there. And there's no reason for it other than it clears 280 to go to San Road. You can stand there every morning. And it turns red for the people coming off 280 and lets them go green from Santana Road. 5 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Has no response whatsoever to the meter.
So that's something we're working, the solution to that's called adaptive signal timing, and we're working on getting more of that in place.
I've heard that. It's working. It's not working.
Okay.
It hasn't happened. 3 years.
mayor talked about it in the budget message as well the other night, that that's just getting rolled out.
We definitely have corridors in San Jose with it, and if we talk after this, I can get your information. I can let you know what those corridors are, and we can talk about them a little bit more.
We have, what, two F-level intersections, which is Stevens Creek and Monroe, and Stevens Creek and Winchester. Is that right?
No, within the Winchester and Santana Row Valley Fair urban villages, every intersection is currently LOSD or better. Including the protected intersections, which are the ones you described, which are Stevens Creek and Winchester. I was told they're LOSD. They may be worse conceptually. I could be wrong about that. But every intersection is LOSD or better. Stevens Creek and Winchester and Stevens Creek and Monroe are protected intersections. And one of our traffic people told me they're also LOSD currently. They are. They are currently. The approved development is expected to drop them below.
Where is an F level in San Jose?
The intersection of San Tomas and Stevens Creek. That's why the traffic impact analysis identified that going to an LOSF, which is why it's contributing to the additional lanes on San Tomas. I hope I don't have that wrong.
People in the area in general had a lot of problems with the traffic analysis that was done for that, but nobody really
Yeah,
actually.
if they're going to spend a lot of money building an extra lane on San Tomas for an intersection that doesn't need it, you might want to relook at it.
Well, that's county. The county is doing, the county's doing that anyhow, so this is a contributory amount of money to the county's effort.
Correct.
It's that cost.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the city.
Where that came from is going to come up later in this presentation. So I need to find now I know I need to find an example of an LOSF that everyone feels an LOSF. The question is about a flashing red light for left turns, and I would have to defer to my signals group. Left turn, a flashing red light, left turn arrow. Is that like the yield left turn on red? Right. I would have to defer to our signals group. I don't know. It depends on what the California state law says, what the city policy is, and I don't.
I know there is one in Cupertino.
Okay.
It's free. And like I say, frequently back east, like they're all over the place. When you're in the off-traffic direction, they really work.
Okay. So I don't know the answer to that. Yes.
Sure, the plan is to add lanes to San Tomas. However, this plan where the vehicles reserved are going to work, that they're all going to take San Tomas, but we need the extra lane.
There's a traffic, the normal process is a traffic impact analysis. So here, let me move slides.
This one?
One before that. There we go, cool. So this is kind of the process that we're talking about. This is how it works in the city currently. So depending on the project location, type, and size, if it's in a certain area, of a certain type, a certain size, it's required to do a traffic impact analysis. So every development generates and attracts trips, and the city has a model, right? So within the city's model has existing traffic, puts new development in that model with the already approved developments to say where is traffic going to flow in the system now according to the model's estimation. You know, it's predicting the future or trying to do its best guess of it. If the model of the traffic impact analysis shows an intersection dropping below LOSD, then the project is required to mitigate that negative impact unless it's overridden. Overridden basically means that the traffic impact analysis did everything it could to try to find a way to mitigate that negative impact. They found that there was a significant unmitigatable negative impact, but because of overarching considerations, they're going to override and let that project move forward, even though there's an unmitigatable significant impact. So there's two ways to mitigate. Yeah, there's two ways to mitigate traffic impact. One is to bring the intersection, make physical changes to the intersection itself to bring it back up above LOSD. The other option is to what Stevens Creek and Winchester are and Stevens Creek and Monroe are, is for it to be, if it's a protected intersection, then rather than physically modifying the intersection to bring it back above LOSD, the intersection stays exactly the way it is, and that creates a pot of value that can be then go towards other improvements, which the reserve, which is the dot exercise we had, where we had people vote on what those other improvements were. And I'll talk a little bit more about protected intersections in the next slide. So these are protected intersections. So like I said, there's no room to make the intersection wider, so it can become protected. The protected intersection must be adopted by the city council. We don't just put them in place if it's identified, the city council votes on them. to put them in place. And then I explained this, what it does for creating value. And the language the policy says is that the value created by protected intersections can go to improve system capacity or to enhance non-automobile modes. And the priorities for protected intersection value are projects and adopted plans in neighborhoods proximate to the development or the protected intersection. And then the policy 5-3 also talks about proximate affected neighborhoods and defines them as community improvement zones. So this is the diagram from policy 5-3. The little dots are the current locations of protected intersections. Stevens Creek and Monroe is also a protected intersection. It's not shown on the map because it wasn't protected when the policy was created, but since new developments come in, it's been protected. And the zones around the protected intersections are the community improvement zones. So that's where the improvements from the value created by the protected intersection need to take place.
How often or who reviews the policies and procedures around these topics?
They're reviewed often, and everyone looks at them and we talk about them, but it takes a big push to want to take them to the city council to actually have them revised. It needs to be clear that the policy's out of date.
When we, as I think about the slide you had up previously and the comment about mitigation, and I think about Stevens Creek and Winchester and not being able to widen that intersection, and then you have VTA, and the project's probably on hold, but VTA wants to do BRT and take 2 lanes away from an intersection that can't be widened in the first place.
Right.
That begins to
VTA has
sound-
backed way off dedicated
I
land.
know they
BRT.
have, but it's that kind of thing that really ends up being inflammatory, I think.
Agreed.
One question. So on the colors there, that's in a community improvement zone? I mean, that green, dark green looks like it's our area. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, it's our urban village, yeah, as Steve points out.
We're having this discussion as part of the WAG and some other meetings as well, but when we look at something like Stevens Creek and Winchester or Stevens Creek and Monroe, the city takes a perspective on its development. Does it consider the impact on the people and neighborhoods in Santa Clara? And
Generally, sort of, yes. Because the CEQA it's all up for grabs. Anything that's negative environmental impact, can cross city boundaries. What it really comes down to, though, is what projects are entitled to. If you go back into the general plan, the urban village planning process we're undergoing, we're establishing land uses, and uses for those lands that the owner is entitled to the benefits of their property, So that's kind of where it comes from, is the unmitigatable impacts. A lot of it, the overriding consideration is often the person that owns that land, what rights they have to the benefit of that land.
so that particular intersection, Stevens Creek and Winchester, the city only owns half the intersection. How are decisions made between the 2 cities in terms of what's going to happen? Because I assume that neither city can act unilaterally.
It would require buy-in from, because the road, whichever part of the roadway falls in the other jurisdiction, they have the power over it. So there would have to be unilateral cooperation. Is that correct?
Now they have all the signal lights for Senator and they
So the LOS is currently the primary traffic analysis criteria in California. It's switching to VMT. Senate Bill 743 is it's not officially switching to VMT, but it looks that way. Senate Bill 743 requires the state to establish a criteria that's not LOS for CEQA analysis. And it's required that, I don't know exactly when the time frame is, but I think it's in the next year or two, the state is required to establish that criteria, and the cities have another 2 years after that to learn to incorporate that criteria into their CEQA procedures. It looks like it's going to be some version of VMT, that vehicle miles traveled, and it might be VMT per capita. That's what most people are talking about now. So dividing the VMT by the number of workers if it's a commercial use, or dividing VMT by the number of residents if it's a residential use.
Does it factor in transit in that scenario too? Then, like if you had a bus, then would that factor the VMT factor that in?
Generally, it's overall vehicle miles traveled on the roadway. So, like if 7 people are driving in cars, now there's 7 people in a bus. So LOS measures traffic flow. That street right there is a picture of LOS-A, a big open roadway with 1 car on it, would be LOS-A. The picture on the right shows a street that's more LOS-D, E, or F. So LOS is not a measure of safety, using capacity efficiently, or of quality. VMT is vehicle miles traveled. Basically, land use mixes, the transportation network, and how people choose to behave leads to estimates of what VMT will be. Shorter trips, more walking, more biking, more shared trips lead to lower VMT, less vehicle miles traveled, and less vehicle miles traveled leads to things like increased roadway capacity that's available for use, lower emissions, better air quality, etc. And VMT, I'll just note, is not a direct measure of safety or quality. The city does have a policy called Vision Zero. Safety is the Department of Transportation's #1 traffic analysis criteria, and quality is something that's very subjective. When we all get together in rooms and talk, we try to figure out what quality means to all of us. Vision Zero is all safety. It's that nothing is more important than preventing deaths and serious accidents on our LOS. The time periods are already specified. They're not 24/7. VMT, I don't know exactly how the calculation is going to play out yet. That's still being figured out. There's a lot of opportunity to use our roadway more efficiently if we find ways to shift schedules, right? If people start to drive during off-peak times, then we can use our roadway a lot more efficiently.
Singapore, right?
They do that all kinds of places. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think to Davelin's point, particularly in this area where LOS is measured at these particular times, but the Valley Fair and Santana Row are primary draws not at those times.
Right.
So they're specifically designed to have high impact at the times that aren't being measured, and all that impact is cars.
Right.
Which means it's an all day, and the peak time actually might be 11 a.m. on a Saturday, not 7 a.m. on a...
Right.
So the time needs to match up with the land use, and it may be that in some land use cases it's all day.
Yes, absolutely. In my opinion, we should collect 24/7 traffic data and use that data to identify what the real peaks are. And I advocate for that, but there's only if there's air conditioning.
Yeah. And when you collect data, don't forget seasonal variations, because we go from Thanksgiving to the middle of January in a perpetual, it's like a plug. You're constipated. And we need prunes or something like the old days.
Since you're an acknowledged traffic guru, I'd like to ask, I don't really know how it works, but I know there's cameras on most every intersection. I don't know, do they record what's happening through those cameras?
Ours
Is
don't
it saved to a hard drive, or is it's all just real time? And is there like a little man in a booth who's watching it, pushing a button, going, oh, here comes a car, looks like there's nobody around, or how does it work? Or
there's a whole staff in a booth, right across the street right across the street from City Hall. We have.
And what if they see something? What if they see something really bad, like an accident? Do they go, oh, I'm a traffic guy, so I'm not going to call a cop or an ambulance? I mean, what's the mentality of these people, and what goes on?
I don't know their emergency response practices, but I do know the cameras are there so that our traffic experts can time signals. So they'll look at the signals and they'll time according to what actual traffic patterns are. That's the non-technology way of doing adaptive signal timing. Yeah, thank you. So adaptive signal timing, we use technology to time signals. If we don't have that infrastructure in place, we have people that sit in what looks like air traffic control across the street from City Hall, and they reprogram the signals according to the cameras. And then we don't use it for collecting traffic data. I wish we should. I wish we did. I've heard of technology out there that will take that, use video analytics, store it on a server so we can use it for traffic count data. I've talked with that. We're starting those conversations in DOT currently. We'll see where that goes. As far as recording it, that's a whole lot of data. We would fill up server after server after server in no time if we recorded all that data.
I don't know about that. And data storage is cheap, but I mean, I have video cameras that are recording, they'll record 2 or 3 weeks running.
Right.
2 terabyte hard drive.
Right.
8 cameras at one location.
Totally. My first job out of college was selling CCTV systems. Back then, a terabyte was like 10 grand. I just backed up my laptop, and I bought a terabyte, and it was like $60. So, point well taken.
So I'm thinking, maybe that might have held true at one point in time in the past, that storage is pretty cheap, and if Waze and Google, all that, I mean, we've had some conversations, but there must be a way to port out some analytical data if we aggressively pursue it, I would think.
Agreed. I imagine there's also some privacy issues with recording that data. But I agree with you. We should be pulling that data out to be able to use it for planning purposes and also to program our transportation system to operate more effectively.
Or even just record Waze, at different times of the day, and you'll get a pretty good picture of what the traffic's like.
Good idea. Yes.
I'm not sure exactly how you do your work, but you have maybe these strips that count the number of cars coming by every day. So how do you know the difference between a car and a bus, first of all? Second of all, you're doing this vehicle miles travel, and there's corporate buses that run because VTA and the other entities can't figure out where people go every day for some reason. There's a lot of people here that work different hours, but they'd be willing to take a bus if the bus went there at the hour we need to go. So how do you collect that data if my company has a bus with 75 people on it, dropping off various locations? We're saving less vehicle miles traveled, but you're not collecting or connecting it because you're looking at VTA or how's that fit in the puzzle, or does it not fit in the puzzle?
I think there's a lot of questions there. Let's start. What kind of data would you like to add? Which question first? Which kind of data are you asking how we collect?
Well, you said we're going to change the vehicle miles traveled.
It will be likely,
So,
yes.
if you got 7 people and 7 cars, that's 49 miles. You got 7 people in one bus, that's 1 mile.
Right.
Multiplication factor, right?
It's something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're throwing them on a bus, but whose bus are you counting, and what bus are you counting? How do you count that bus? With a little strip? Is somebody guy sitting on a corner saying, "Oh, big bus went by, but it's empty," or "Big bus by when it's full"? Are you collecting VTA data, their toll fare, and says, "Okay, at this day we have an average ridership of this," but you have private buses. We see them every day on. There's one that comes down to Williams in the evenings all the time, big giant double decker. They're all over the place. My company has service to the back of San Antonio Road. Unfortunately, it's banker's hours, and I don't work those hours. So, because I could be writing that. So, you're talking about all this stuff, but the easiest thing to do is assist with your data to assist mass transit rather than just putting in more lanes. Where does everybody go? They go San Tomas, they go 280. Just put your L train. Your solutions very easy. I know it's not cheap, but it's easy because that's where people already go.
Right. There's a lot of different ways to collect a lot of different types of data. Some are easier to access than others. Some are more useful than others. Just for answer a couple of those questions. With the traffic count data, we do put tubes across the road. I believe that you can tell the difference between cars and trucks based on the length of the wheelbase. So if there's 1, 2, and which order. And then also if you put down 2 tubes, you can also get speed data. And so that costs a little bit less, and we're trying to make a practice of doing that, distance over time. We do have a partnership with VTA where we do get ridership data from them. There's also transit ITS. There's mechanisms to get boardings, mechanisms to get alightings. The hardest type of data that would be the best for transportation is origin destination data. If we had a way in our database to figure out where everyone started and where they went and how they got there and by what mode they got there, that would be very powerful data to do analysis with, but that data is the hardest to get. Anything else? Great. Thank you.
That was the last slide?
That's the last slide.
Wow. No, that was it. We really pestered Doug that much that we exhausted our questions.
It is very hot.
Yeah. I made him sit in the wrong side. Well, Doug, thank you very much. You had a lot of tough questions there, and you answered them. I think the only question that maybe it was a takeaway that wasn't answered, I wrote it down here, and I forgot to ask someone to take notes for me. But what was it? It was, what about the flashing red light? So if you get back to us on that.
Will do.
Yeah, the flashing. Yeah.
You got it.
Yep, to allow traffic to flow faster. Yeah. Oh, and it looks like Steve has something.
So I'll ask one more, and this is, I'll make it as a statement and just tell me if it's right or not. The CEQA analysis for traffic when the EIR is being done for projects does not take into consideration good, bad, what do we like, what do we want, how do we feel. It is strictly measurement data. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is the beginning of the CEQA process, there's a criteria established that are used to evaluate how, and the project is weighed according to the established criteria. So with traffic, it's traffic, noise, air quality, and then we do have a logical exploration of how the traffic relates to traffic, noise, and air quality.
So I think the thing to take back, and I'll use the reserve as an example, is that the scoping and the approach to the analysis are either out of date and so not appropriate, or the work that's being done in some cases is being done by consultants remotely who don't even visit. It's clear from what they write that they haven't even actually visited the area because of the way they record things. But I'll give you as an example, when the EIR was done for the reserve, it did not consider impact at Saratoga Avenue
Yeah.
in 280, but it considered impact at Meridian and Parkmore, which for the people in this area, and I've done enough surveys to know, even though my surveys have been biased to age and population, more people are heading north and to Santa Clara and to North San Jose than downtown. To not count Saratoga and 280, same distance. But it's these kinds of things that, again, leave us baffled. And of course, people, as you read the comments on Nextdoor, and you've been in enough of our meetings, right? People really want the EIR or think the EIR should be addressing quality, what we would generally bag as quality of life kinds of things.
Right.
And it just seems to me from what I've studied for CEQA that it doesn't. It's got a set of criteria, as you said, for a specific set of topics, but that it's the city that has the flexibility to decide the radius that's going to be studied, for instance, right? Cumulative impact comes by law as part of CEQA. But it's that intelligence, and I think that what we see generally is that the city doesn't take advantage in its process, for whatever reason, of the knowledge of the people on the ground.
Great. I'd like to respond to that a little bit. So the city generally tries to follow, at least the people I work with, the CEQA guidelines that are produced by the California's Office of Planning and Research. And the cities still do have power to deviate from that as they see fit. The second part of what you're saying of listening to the community, I will say, I know I haven't answered everyone's questions, and I'm not necessarily, the Department of Transportation, the city has a lot of experts, and I'm not an expert in everyone's field. But what I do try to do more than anything is be out here with the community, understand what your point of view is, and go back to the city and advocate for your point of view. So I'm hoping to address that a little bit more.
I think as a group, but I'll speak for myself, thrilled that you've been coming to these meetings and find you more than responsive, and a great listener. It's just I will go to any point that I can to just keep reinforcing these same things, hopefully until we see a change that the community thinks, now this kind of makes sense.
Sounds
So,
great.
if not, definitely appreciate your efforts.
So one thing I just thought of that kind of addresses Clark's point about the VMT, and I was going to try to pull it up, but as I understand, there's a program right now, a voluntary program, where I think 5,000, they're looking for 5,000 volunteers to put little transponders in their cars so they could actually measure mileage and so forth.
That's starting to get to collecting origin destination data. So that's great. I believe that program exists as well.
It's in California. I was just going to Google search it here because I think they're looking for volunteers. Yeah.
I've also heard of systems that are run off your phone. So I've heard of Bluetooth sensors that are like pieces of infrastructure within cities, and also they pick it up off GPS. So if you volunteer, I don't know exactly what the name of the system is, but I've heard of it. We would love that data. Origin destination data is the best, but it's hard to collect.
Yeah, here it is. It looks like it's the administered by Caltrans or something, but it's an experiment at this point, and I believe it's 5,000 cars. It looks like there's just all the press about it, but I can find that and put it out in the minutes, so anyone who's interested can volunteer. I know there's a lot of concerns people have because now suddenly you do have the potential for tracking, so there's those privacy questions, which I'm sure are being addressed, but still there's concern of that among people. So any more questions for, and Google, yeah, you're right, Google has it. Any more questions for Doug? Well, let's give Doug a very big hand for coming out in this warm evening, riding his bicycle here on a day that's not so warm. So.